Hey, welcome back to Common Mansplaining. I'm Eddie and that's Christian. And you're back on the channel where no opinion is too common, where you will never find an opinion more common than ours.
Yes.
All
Today
right.
today especially common.
Yeah, oh
Where
wow, yes.
my Hawaiian shirt notes, we are back. For those that are longtime followers of the channel know, well back in summer, we predicted both Trump's election, that Biden would 100% pardon his son. So this is a special
We're 2 for 2.
we
Oh,
told
and
we told you so episode. And what could be more common than the saying "we told you so"?
then I told you so. And you called the elimination of the Department of Education too, right?
Yeah.
That's like we're like 3 for 3-0. Hey,
and
listen,
that Gates was
yes.
just a smokescreen
Yes,
to draw attention away from
we're on point here, guys. Before we get started, I just want to take a quick moment to say that if you enjoy our content, please help us out by hitting the subscribe button. It takes like seconds out of your day, and it's like, think about it like a tip for a waiter that you don't actually have to lose any money to give, right? It's like takes 5 seconds, you go boop,
Indeed.
and then
A European tip, yes.
Yeah, right.
Australian tip.
All right, so Hunter Biden. Let me just say in advance that I knew this was going to happen. I mean, I don't think anybody's really shocked.
You're dying of not surprise?
Yeah, right.
No, there were plenty of people who were shocked.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
I can't, I just can't. I mean, okay, the only thing that I think it would ever have hinged on is does Harris win or does Biden win? At the time, he may have thought he was going to win. That's the only thing I could think of. And then, like, if the Republicans take over the presidency, I was almost certain that this was going to happen. I was honestly very, very surprised to hear Biden continually say not that, that he was not going to do this. Cause I'm like, why is he saying that? Well, he's definitely going to do it.
Because it's so unpopular. It's so universally seen as unwise and self-serving. The polling is just terrible. I mean, they say it's why Jimmy Carter lost or won the election. Was because Gerald Ford pardoned Nixon.
That was it.
That was it. The people just, regardless of every other fact, were just wanted regime change. They were almost. We like to hold our public figures accountable to some degree. Look, Joe Biden ran for the presidency for 40 years, and for 40 years, the American people said, "No thanks." Why do they say no thanks? Because they knew he'd be a terrible president.
Yeah.
Right? What has he done? He's been a terrible president. And this, he continues to damage his party on his way out. I think there's some bigger issues too and so a lot of people out there you can find, and lots of people talking about the political damage being done to this polling and how this is taking the independents, which are now in this last election numbered greater than those who are registered Democrats, independents, and shifting those independents so much more towards in favor of the Republican Party versus Democratic Party.
Yeah, and they were already like sliding that direction. Now, I wonder if the fact that they scooted him out of the office, like had anything to do with this. Like maybe he was gonna just abide by whatever strict adherence to the rule of law he originally, claimed he was going to do, and then after that, like mini coup where they kind of like, just scooted him off to the side, like we're just gonna put Harrison in front. I wonder if he's thinking like, I don't know these cats anything.
He definitely could have some spite, because he's definitely not acting by counseling. He's definitely didn't run this by other Democrat leadership to see that they were like, yeah, this is a great idea, Joe, because they would have universally said no. And they're the ones who were shocked by this, because they were touting this as a moral high ground, as why they were the rule of law, why they respected law. And I'd like to talk about this a little bit deeper.
Go into it.
But this was something that they used for to politically beat over the head that they were superior morally to the Republican Party because of this, that they weren't
So much
self-serving
better.
in the use of it. Now, so their political costs to be paid. Here, if Joe really felt this about his son, he should have had the courage to make this decision before the election and
Right.
suffer the political consequences there.
Yeah,
Pay
or
that
at
political
least
capital. Doing it after the election in this lame duck phase really seems like it's self-serving.
or at least like he should have just like played it tighter to his, like played coy, say, are you going to pardon your son? And like he does the little Joe Biden turn around and smile, like one of those, like where he just doesn't say anything. At least that, and that way,
his is like, read my lips, no pardon for Hunter Biden. No, I mean it's almost to that level. But I think on one level, like we as a Christian nation of people, we understand the idea of a father forgiving his son of terrible, right? It's like the prodigal son is a parable that everybody knows about a son who leaves, wastes his living, right, and comes back to his father, and his father, right, what is his father sees him afar off,
kills
and runs to him and takes him in, and it's just beautiful. I have a very close friend of mine who had a son that suffered from addiction problems, something I've never had to be tasked with. So I can't speak to the difficulty of that friction. But he, right, what he saw his son go through and how much he loved his son and how much he wanted to help him. I think we understand that. And if it were a question of mercy, I think we'd be willing to cut a lot of slack with this. But it extends beyond that, right? Because how it was done, when it was done,
right,
seems self-serving to Joe. They say like all potential crimes that even haven't been litigated,
such a
from
weird
this date,
11 years, 11 years
from a certain date in 2014.
That's like that's like Joe's like, all right, listen, I'm gonna give this guy a pardon. It's gonna be for 10 years, 9 months, 3 days, and 11 minutes. It's like, what? Like why so specific? Why?
Well, this is what the common men know, right? So what the common men know, for those of you who follow this channel closely, we love you. But we spoke in depth about how Ukraine is a major world point right now. And a flashpoint of escalating tension for military issues. In 2014, and really, from during the Obama, when Obama was elected in 2008 and Joe Biden became vice president in 2009, right. Ukraine was not a major player on the world stage.
Yeah.
What they were was a kind of a Wild West for corruption, right? A lot of stuff going on there, people making money, nobody being held accountable, right? No journalists were covering what was going on there. There was no audits. If you did anything shady in Ukraine,
it's like whatever.
Like nobody's like checking receipts or anything like that. And Joe being a senator involved in foreign policy and with eyes on the presidency, knew about this, had briefings on this.
Right.
And once he was vice president, essentially saw opportunities to have his family profit from this and started, making connections. And then essentially what he's been accused of is then getting people in Ukraine to give money to his family members in exchange for access to high-level government official, i.e. Joe,
right?
To do it in a way, right, that they didn't really expect with scrutiny, because Ukraine, who cares about Ukraine, right? But what's happened 2 years ago when Putin invaded Ukraine, all of a sudden Ukraine became an issue, not a sort of quirky little corrupt place, but a place that we had to think about.
Right.
Right. And he had to make policy about spending our treasure, escalating our tensions with a nuclear power? And are his decisions made in a vacuum of, is this wise or is this self-serving? And he has to cover he has debts to nefarious or corrupt players in Ukraine that he has to support and that he never anticipated. And so there's so much now, right, that when people say, look, we're not crazy about Ukraine being overrun by Russia, but is our level of support appropriate?
Right.
And should we really tension up and risk this type of, nuclear kind of engagement with Russia over? And those are questions that, like, I think my summary of our last talk should be: I'm not an isolationist.
Right.
I'm not a neocon, like, super interventionist.
Right.
But I need to be talked into each scenario. I think each situation requires its own. Right. You can't blanket and say we're never going to anything. Everyone requires its own. And so I could be on board for the Ukraine intervention, but I need to be sold.
Right.
And initially, I was kind of on board for it, but with each level of escalation,
it gets worse and worse.
Right,
and
I'm
worse.
like, they're not even bothering to try to really sell it anymore. They just feel like we have to keep doing this because losing is so bad.
Yeah, of course.
And now, and with this, pardoning him for the Ukrainian thing, just for the timeline that Hunter was involved in Ukraine, Burisma as well, really makes any decision making this administration did related to Ukraine much, much more suspect.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think that the dates involved in this pardon are very telling, right? And one intriguing point is that now that Hunter has been pardoned, he is no longer protected by the Fifth Amendment, and if brought before Congress, must answer the questions. And
yeah.
In theory, now that having been said, he's lived in a political elite family for a long time. He's just going to evade the questions just like everybody else. He's going to have counsel, right? It's going to be it's not going to actually, I've never actually seen an oversight committee actually generate, actionable intel for a long, long time, right? But in theory, it could assist with investigations going forward. And maybe this was kind of like a preemptive strike, knowing that the justice system that is coming in with Trump's picks, with the DNI, the AG, all the new players on the board, maybe they were worried that certain things were about to be uncovered.
Well, I mean, the Justice Department, to their credit, right, while they were kind of taken surprised by this, they were moving forward with, like, the tax evasion charges. They were like, this is consistent. But we're not. The judge in that tax case in California specifically said that he's like, this is a rewrite of history for you to say that this prosecution is politically motivated. He's like, if I was a judge, I would have thrown that out long ago. This is all very reasonable for people that, because of addictions, stopped paying their taxes, then came back and paid it.
Right, make amends
but the administration, while they were moving forward with stuff, I think the current administration was slow rolling it a little bit. That Trump's Justice Department and attorneys would not. And excuse me.
Thank you.
Supposedly, I've just seen a flip through. I haven't been able to read closely. There were potentially 194 actionable crimes documented from the Hunter Biden laptop.
Yeah,
that was actionable and was going to move forward, and
most of which were, stupid stuff. But
there were things like that so he wanted to preemptively. So those things maybe were being slow rolled, but we're not going to be slow rolled by new.
Right.
And then whatever things came up out of that, potentially that reflect back on Biden and his sort of pay for play access game with Ukraine that I think has blown up in its face. I think if he wasn't involved in Ukraine, he would have taken a much more measured approach to supporting Ukraine and wouldn't have just jumped in knee jerk like, oh, I absolutely have to save Ukraine at all costs.
Maybe.
Right?
Yeah, it's one. I wonder. There's a lot to respond to here. One thing is, I encourage people not to forget that Hunter was already a convict, right? Like, it's one of those things where people look at some of these charges and they're like, oh, this is so horribly unfair and blah, 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 blah. And people, make amends on tax evasion all the time. And people, all he did was lie on a gun form and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, but he's already a felon, right? Yeah. It's one of those things where
due process. Yeah.
All I ask for is consistency, right? And bear in mind, I'm asking for this from a place where I hold all politicians accountable, where I am not a Trump fogey, like I'm not a stooge of the Republican side either. And I guarantee you, when I see corruption anywhere, I'm upset, right? And so then all I ask is that same level of consistency from the other side of the equation, right? So if you're going to say that, we need tighter gun control, then how could you possibly say that a felon that's lying on a gun form is an okay thing? And if you're going to go the other way with it and say that that's really not that big of a deal, then I don't want to hear crap about gun control, right? Like, I just let it go, right? If you got to pick a position on the spectrum and stay there, and that's all.
Yeah, it's very discrediting towards their platform position, which is anti-gun.
Absolutely.
But I would kind of like to explore a little bit deeper to belong the political costs and the hypocrisy to the moral questions.
Yes.
Right.
Let's talk
Those
about
are the things
that
are more interesting to me. And one is that I think, and you spoke to this about why we need to hold all politicians accountable, and corruption needs to be abhorred universally by everybody. Right. It was one thing to say, hey, if the president's a bit of a doofus, I don't care as long as he's my doofus. But we need to also say, if the president's corrupt, I'm absolutely outraged, even if he's my doofus. That should just be a standard nobody's willing to tolerate. Because I think the American dream, at its heart, I mean, there are a lot of things said about it, is the idea to come to America and succeed or live a life here and not have to do it dishonestly.
Right.
Not have to give in, not have to be corrupt or interact with corruption, to just have this social framework where I can just be honest
and just live.
If I'm hardworking and if I that I can succeed, and I don't have to, it doesn't have to be who I know. Certainly some of those things can give you advantages, but they're not incumbent. And the government at least will play fair and won't, to a point where I won't have to, won't corruptly be punishing me or making it harder for me to succeed, which is the case strongly in other countries where people want to leave, and their idea is come to America is the land of the free, and they're free to be honest,
right,
and succeed honest. I think that's a big part, and so the corruption undermines that.
Let me ask you this question. So this is what I've been pondering, and I love your insights. So there's obviously a weight on being corruption free, right? We do want to be corruption free.
Well,
and there's also a weight
at least corruption intolerant. We should be outraged.
Yeah. Right.
We know people are going to try to act corrupt because they're self-interested, but we should be vigilant in fighting it.
Right. But the other side of this coin that is applicable is the family value system, right? And we also, like you mentioned in the beginning, I don't know many fathers that wouldn't do a whole lot for their children.
Oh yeah.
Now, I being in the ex-military myself, I've been put in this situation, not personally, but like the hypotheticals come up. And one of the things that when you discuss when you take your oath of office is, when it comes down to it, if you're called to make a choice between family and nation, you are supposed to choose nation, right? And I think at the end of the day, if it came down to it, if I was in a situation where it was like my son's life or the nation's lives, like all of them, I'd pick the nation. I probably would. I love my son more than anything in the history of man. But that having been said, I would still, like, if it was a dire situation where my treason were to cost, America its existence, for example, I'm picking allegiance to nation. Now, this situation isn't a situation where Biden is like, son or America dies. Right? This is a situation where it's like son or nothing, really.
No, I disagree. Okay, because you as a private citizen, you as a dad, your stewardship is for your son. And so you could make that decision to favor the nation over that. But that's not asked of you. Those that take an oath of office, right? This is why we hold politicians to such high level. Joe Biden swore to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. So he went to law school. I haven't gone to law school. I'm a common man here. There are certain oaths that in the practice of law, lawyers have to do, that senators in the process of working for the government and administering and creating the laws have to do. And it is a higher
military personnel.
Yeah, military person. Right. When you're active military, that you need to put the needs of the country above these.
That oath doesn't die, though. Just because I'm ex-military doesn't mean I have ceased my oath. Technically speaking, so
if you feel that way, feel that oath, then I can see that. But as a private citizen, it's different. Like if I want to pay political costs to protect my son who's done something embarrassing or done something who has sinned.
Right.
Let's just talk about sins versus somebody who's taken oath of office to uphold law, right? And uphold the Constitution, undermines that to hide their sins. And now hiding or forgiving Biden Hunter's sins is one thing. Using it as a means to cover his own sins is what should be unexcusable, and really, I think, is what is going to sway independents from and leave a bad taste in the mouth for a generation. I think really, they cannot be trusted when they say something that they're not acting in self-interest. They have this as proof that they absolutely are. Now, have you watched the show Better Call Saul?
I've seen like one episode of it.
Okay.
I haven't gotten into it, but you're telling me you like that.
Yeah, well, it's entertaining, it's well made, but at its heart, the theory is it's really treatise about law, right? About what the law is, and that the law can be a beautiful thing, something that helps you feel safety. There's safety in the law.
Sure.
When it's wielded correctly. When it's wielded incorrectly, it can be a weapon. It can be terrifying, right? That you can feel oppressed by the law. And so in Better Call Saul, the beginning of these two brothers, and one who essentially this Supreme Court level kind of judge who the law is sacred to him, really a sacred thing. And the Saul character who he can be a decent lawyer, but he is a fantastic con man. And he has these urges he thinks he's doing it for the right thing, but to actually, rather than just use good sound law, to use con man shenanigans to try to, what he achieves, thinks at first is a good end, that the ends justify the means.
Sure.
That if he's, and it's sort of like that and his brother is really appalled by it. It feels like it's like giving a monkey hand grenade or right, that the law is too powerful, too sacred to be put in the hands of people who know enough but don't have the ethics, who don't care about it.
Right.
Now, we could have a separate issue about the sacredness of man's laws, and I think America has a is fairly laissez-faire about or understanding about people breaking the laws of man. being very forgiving about sort of outlaw characters. You think of how much people love like Bonnie and Clyde, or love
Everybody loves a
rappers
good
with
villain.
public figures with troubled pasts and things like that.
Han Solo as a smuggler.
Yeah, smuggler, things like that. Breaking tariffs or types of
Robin
things like
Hood.
that. I have time broken the laws of man. Like we kind of hold those a little bit different than the big ones, the God's laws.
Right.
But there's still something to be said, especially when you're a public official, when you're an officer of the court, when you've studied law, when you treat it irresponsibly and discard it in a way to cover embarrassment, maybe he's worried about his legacy, things like that, undermines, I think, the whole culture and trust in that America, you can come here and we'll at least try to have a fair play. We'll try to have a system of fair play.
Sure. I mean, it does. I agree. Let me play devil's advocate for just a moment. In First Nephi, we have a situation where someone is called to make a choice between following the law or doing something a little bit different to support their family getting away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they choose, in this instance, to neglect the law to make sure that their family is safe, so that they're not followed by, fleets full of men, right?
So
let me throw that at you here.
They use deception, yeah.
Yeah, well, not only that, but also just the slaying of of labor, right? So I just want to equate that. I know it's not a good analogy, maybe, but just there are times where one is called to weigh how important the law is, what implicate. Like, here's what I'm thinking, right? In the abstract, if there's no serious connection of Joe Biden to any direct illicit corruption. If it's one of those things where he knows his son is corrupt, his son is a lost soul, and as a father, he's just trying to expend his political capital to protect his son, who probably, is not likely to continue his corruption being this old now, at this point, it's likely that they're just going to kind of softly retire in the distance, right? Walk off into the sunset and never be heard from again. If that's the case, I could see a strong case for being like, you know what, this has almost no end game political implications. It's just me expending political capital to rescue my son. However, if instead it's like Joe Biden's really involved in something and Hunter is the linchpin for that that investigation, and Joe Biden's using it to cover his own corruption, then I think that it's absolutely unacceptable in every situation. But
other people, we know those two are involved. We don't know who else is involved. It's covering up. We don't even know who in Ukraine's involved. To be
respectful, we don't know that Joe Biden is involved. In fact, I would say that there's evidence to point toward him being involved, but there's also evidence to point toward him deliberately trying to evade being involved. So it's one of those things where I think his son, this is just my appraisal, I think his son constantly tried to involve him, and he probably, this is just a guess, probably broke down and did it once or twice, but in the end was like, you can never do this again. Why did you bring this to my doorstep? Get the hell away from me. And he really did distance himself from Hunter at various locations, even going so far as to say, I'm not going to pardon him. I'm, going to let the justice system do its thing, even though we see.
But when you did this while in office as a public official, this all needs to be vetted. This all needs to come out. This needs
Absolutely.
This needs to be history. And even if you don't go to jail for it, we need to know the full story.
Absolutely.
Right? We need to know and the influence that this had on your decision making and the risk we're taking by provoking a nuclear power.
How do you get that full story though? Like, explain to me what steps we could take.
Well, continue to have investigations that Barrington have the weight of a criminal prosecution.
And it looks like
now the criminal prosecution's out. You think we can still investigate and find things out now that
Hunter Hunter is out of the picture, and I'm honestly surprised that Biden didn't just like pardon himself for the same period of time.
He can't.
Like,
you can't buy that, but he's talking about he's talking about pardoning. Sure? There's talk about a lot of like pardoning Fauci and a bunch of other people that could potentially have things that they could say against him. Or
are you sure that you can't pardon yourself?
Yeah.
I don't think that's accurate. I think
it's a gift.
I think that had Donald Trump been in a situation where he's like in jail, for example, and won the presidency, which was explored at one point in time, as insane as that is, it was decided that Trump could, in fact, pardon himself from any federal charge. So I don't know if that. I believe it's probably a novel case, right? Like no president's ever been in that situation, but. I think you're right. I think if this derails an investigation, I think that's absolutely unacceptable. However, if this actually helps an investigation because now he can no longer claim the fifth and he's put in front of, Congress and has to answer.
Well, see, right. Then he could win back my credibility right now, or win back credibility in my eyes. Right now, I'm seeing this as a purely self-serving and a cowardly move. Not just, I never knew my grandpa. Died before I was born, but a man who loved my grandpa very closely, stayed in contact with my family, and would share anecdotes or wisdom with us that in a sort of less way. His name was James Brown, actually. Dr. James Brown is our family doctor as well.
Hi.
Yeah. But he told the story when he was a kid. He was playing with matches inside the house, and he set fire to some rugs and curtains and did a not insignificant amount of damage to the home before the fire department came out and put out the fire. And he said he was out on the street as the fire department was finished up and leaving, and he saw his family gathered together around a tree, and he was down the street from him and didn't feel like he belonged with his family.
Yeah, right.
And that his father turned to him, held his arms out open to him, and he ran to him. And he said his father lived 40 more years after that, and not once did he ever mention his son setting fire to their home, right? And he said, if this is a type of forgiveness that our fathers can give us, how much more our Heavenly Father can forgive us. And I've always remembered that story, and it's been sort of something I've tried to aspire to. And I wanted to approach it, in that way. And I know, but what we know is that Joe has personally forgiven Hunter. Welcomed him back into the family. He is around. He is in the White House. He has not just said, "Hey, you're politically bad optics for me, so just go off and hang out in Chesapeake for somewhere." Right? No, he's there. He's around. He's taken the hits of people saying, calling them out. But rather than forgive him for and just say, these crimes I'm pardoning you for, pardoning from him for a timeline.
Yeah, that's a weird.
Right.
Gotta say that's pretty condemning.
Right.
It's pretty rough.
It's not this selfless like act of a father, right? And loving their child more than that. That could be rooted. I don't disagree that he loves his children, but this was right. And
yeah,
the law,
I agree.
I think the law, back to my law issue too, like one of the things Christ really he despised about the Pharisees, right, was that they studied the law. They were studying the law so much, creating these oral laws so that they could obey the law so closely that they don't obey it at all.
Right.
Get around the spirit of the law. It's sort of like all right, if I live on the international date line, then when it's the Sabbath where I can't do anything, I just hop over, and now I'm on Monday, and then it's, or I'm on the next day, and then they hop back, and so you're obeying the law so closely, you're not obeying it at all. And he was like, calling out that as hypocrisy and an abuse of the law. But we're talking about when he was young, he expanded, he could teach, there was beauty in the law, right? And we'll talk about when we talk about free will, that the law is an essential thing. We need law in our country for us to flourish and become wealthy, for us to live happily in groups and cities, and for things to prosper. But to manipulate that can bring down the whole system. And these are the threats to democracy.
2 questions for you.
Sure.
Question number 1 is, with regard to following the law too closely,
okay,
do you not at all see some of the conflict of interest involved in the way that Hunter was these are very, very long sentences for effectively relatively small infractions. Like
has
I said,
he been sentenced? Has he been sentenced?
Yeah, I think it was like 25 years or something like that.
Oh, I didn't know that they'd actually gotten to the sentencing.
Yeah, that's for one of them, I think. I'm not sure about all. I have to go back and check, but so he's got long sentences for essentially small infractions, and I can't shake the feeling that this is still just a witch hunt, right? Whether or not it has fruit at the end of it, I think they were leaning on Hunter to try to get to Joe, and therefore Hunter took some of the brunt of an attack that really was never intended for him. Now, I don't know that for sure. This is a
well. Then the brave thing to do would be to stand up and say, hey, fire at me, right?
I think that's what Biden's doing here.
Yeah,
in a sense. Now, again, like I don't know this, and again, a lot of the other stuff doesn't make sense, like the time involved. But the other question I have for you was, is it? I often wonder about the moral implications of just pardoning in general, like because all presidents at some point in time pardon people. Right? Trump's pardoned, I think, 200 people. Obama pardoned like 2,000 people.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes I think it makes perfect sense, right?
There's no limit. There's no limit to the power. Yeah.
Right. But that having been said, I wonder if the rule of law is like our staunch goal and we're not going to break this rule of law, then when is pardoning even appropriate?
Well, that's true. So I think that's a fair question. I guess the line would be to pardon him for his crimes, right? The ones that he's convicted for.
Yeah.
And not say and potential crimes in these time periods. Like it's just so fuzzy.
Yeah.
Right. It's like it's generally like, and the preemptive pardon. They don't really know, like it's like if somebody
anything that might come up.
That might come up. It's like, look, just all right. If you do that, if you say, look, I want to pardon myself for any crime you might potentially charge me in the future. If that comes down, then it's like, all right, now just you have immunity. Now just tell us everything. Now we need to know everything. We need to know which of your decisions were compromised. And
now I like that. Like this should probably have been accompanied by, and we need a statement, attached to this with your signature saying,
oh yeah.
These are the declared actions.
Hunter Biden should confess.
Confess
to these crimes and then be pardoned of them.
Right.
And then now it's just public record. There's no did you or not confession and then a pardon. And the potential pardon, that's just so it doesn't feel like a charitable act.
Right.
It feels like and when you wield the law for self-interest, the rule of law has to be, this is why we have judges, have to judge in the situation. Is this something that really was intended? Is this the spirit of the law? Is this really striking at our social structure? Because sometimes crimes, and sometimes like serious drug crimes, gun crimes, are not just Hunter hurting himself, but they're antisocial crimes. They undermine public order. They endanger public situations. So this is why judges get to. And is there a political aspect that's being pushed on this? And should we dismiss this case because of that? So judges obviously aren't perfect and have biases, but should really try hard to see beyond those.
Right.
And then in due process, arrive to something that where he had the chance to defend himself, put forward a defense. The prosecution had to put forward evidence, and the evidence had to be so clear and overwhelming that a jury of his peers found that he had acted so egregiously as to convict him of these crimes. Then the judge saying, that meets the spirit of it.
What about what would you hypothetically, what would you think about a law that says, presidents can pardon unless it's like private conflict of interest kind of thing? Like they can pardon, but they can't pardon like their kids. They can pardon, but they can't pardon their close friends, that kind of thing. What do you think about something like that? Just curious.
I think it's a thing that when the framers were writing it were kind of seen as obvious. Like, we don't want to insult George Washington by saying, hey, George, can you please not do any self-interested pardons or people that might have dirt on you, please? And like, what are you accusing me of here?
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's kind of like,
I don't know. They can take it, though.
Especially because he's been trained in ethics, right? Law. It'd be one thing, for a common person who doesn't know, like that's Trump all the time. He's like, well, I should be able to do this. I want to do this. And all these people come back. Well, the Constitution says you can't do that. Or you have to have Congress do that first before you can. Right. And so he wasn't a lawyer. Biden's been doing this for 40 years as a senator. He's been in public office. He's been to the law school. The thing that he's ignorant or he just wants, it's the whole thing. The left thinks the Constitution, there should not be any constraints. If I feel like, as a wise Latina, Sotomayor would say, that the situation merits this, then I just need to do it. We would say, well, maybe be more measured in that.
Yeah,
I don't know. I feel like the moral implication is a disrespect for the law, and disrespect for the oath that he took to defend the Constitution a little bit.
Well, what about, okay, so let's say, hypothetically again, like last question I have for you. Mm-hmm. So let's say you're president, right? Mm-hmm. And you're in this situation, right? But like start to finish. Let's say, unfortunately, you run into a situation where your children are, you have a kid that is in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking I wouldn't lie from the beginning. I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to pardon, if it's, and I would only actually do it if I thought it was good for them, right? Like there are times where my kid does something wrong and I'm like,
they need to suffer these consequences.
Right. Yeah. But there are some times where I'm like, okay, like for example, in this case, if Hunter's staring down 25 years for lying on a form, I'm like, okay, come on, guys, 25 years, like let's I'll deal with it myself.
I'll make sure he doesn't have a gun. I'll make sure he doesn't have a gun.
I'll make sure he'll live with me for the rest of his life.
He'll have Secret Service protection. Yeah.
Right. So, but I would never lie about it. I would always be like, are you going to pardon him? Yeah, probably. Like we're going to make a family decision. I'll talk with Jill about it, whatever, and we'll make a decision. I'm not going to say no, I'm not going to pardon him. No, I'm not going to pardon him. We're going to respect like I wouldn't do that like 25 times and then break my word. But, and then, yeah, my pardon would be more specific. It's like, okay, this crime he's pardoned from, this crime he's pardoned from. If he killed somebody that I don't know about, eat him alive. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
if he did something else that is not in evidence, then tough crap, but that's just me. What do you, what would you do?
But I think this is something that will cloud are thinking on the Bidens, cloud are thinking on the Democratic Party, cloud are thinking really about politicians' self-interest for the next generation. And certainly for the next several elections. And so we'll see that. We'll need to take that calculus. And, politicians are going to need to go the extra mile to prove that they're not corrupt.
Right.
Right now, there's so much suspicion. There's so much conjecture out there that shows that there's shady stuff, that where there's smoke, there's fire kind of thing. Maybe they haven't been convicted, but they're going to need to go beyond the pale, I think, to try to prove and be open that they're not acting in a corrupt way for the American people not to just roll their eyes. And I hope they're not apathetic. I hope they're still outraged and want to fight this and punish them. Say, hey, if you act in a way in any type of corruption, whatever party you are, we will vote you out of office. We will,
Let's go.
That's what I hope.
Common people, let's.
You can't have prosperity if there's corruption.
All right, what do you guys think at home? I want to see some comments. I want your interpretation. What would you do if you were in Biden's shoes? And is there anything that we missed? And we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, is there? What's the moral that you see? The moral aspect of this. That's what I'm interested. So